Are you looking to print a better vase in Cura? Or do you hate that dreaded line seam that you get on your model? Or are they just not strong enough? These are all of the things that I'm going to be talking about in 3 different methods on printing a vase in Cura. So let's go ahead, jump into the video, and get started. So to do these tests, I have a cylinder here, and it is just a solid cylinder, and we are going to essentially be making little cups for tests. This applies to any type of vase that you might be bringing in. Now, if you have brought in some vases from Thingiverse, you might notice that it's a solid object. Like, there's a top to it, and you can't figure out how to actually make this into a vase. So this first method is going to show you how to turn this into a vase. Now, all we're going to have to do is we're going to go to our top and bottom over here, and then we go to our top layers and type in 0. We do not want it to print any top layers. Now, if we slice this, we can see now it has no top layer, but I'm sure you get that we do have an issue. We have infill. So what we're going to do is go over to infill and go to 0%, and then we're going to reslice it. And there we go. Now we have a nice cup. The one issue that you'll find when you're printing something like this, especially when it's really smooth, is there's always one side here that the start and stop points. So when something goes around, here, let's zoom in and you can see this. So let's go through the animation of how this actually prints so we can understand how we get seams. So when it actually starts printing this layer, it prints the outside wall, then it goes on the inside and prints the rest of the walls. On this one specifically, I've got 3 layers for the wall thickness. But the problem is not doing this, it's when it moves up. So when it starts back over, it lifts up, and for a split second, filament is still squeezing out of the actual nozzle, and right there at that white dot is where you get a little tiny blob, and then it just keeps going. So what you get is a line that looks like this. And when you have a nice smooth area like this, using this method, there's not a lot of things you can do. But if you have something with hard edges and things like that, there is one thing we can do, and I'll show you that. But for right now, I'm wanting to change my wall thickness to 1. Doing this will increase your print time for sure, but it also makes it weaker, so it's not as strong. But you can see on the inside here, you're going to see that line because the white dots here are the start points of each layer. So one thing we can do to make this less random is if you go all the way down to the bottom, you see this, seam corner preference. And this is where it actually starts to create the first layer. Now, smart hiding is a great feature because if there is a corner here, it will start on a corner and it's a lot less noticeable. So there's a few options here. There's hide seam, and hide seam will essentially try to pick the position to where it is less noticeable. Expose seam, it just does not care. It'll print anywhere. Hide or expose, if there's an opportunity for it to hide it, it will, but if there isn't, it just does not care. And then smart hiding always tries to find its position to where it will hide it the best possible way. Now you can also use Z seam alignment, and this will actually help you sometimes, depending on your model, where it will find the shortest area, a random position, so it's all over your model, or on the sharpest corner. So if there's a corner, say this would be a box, it would always go on the corner. Another way is using your Z-seam position. You can actually determine where it starts and stops. So I actually have mine on the back of the model. So you can do back left or front. So say if I want this on the front, and then I can slice this. So we're looking at it from the back right now. So it's no longer back there, and it's around here on the front. So if you have a vase or an object that you're printing as a vase, and it definitely has a back, you could easily just move it back here and put it to the back, and then slice it, and then you're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead, hit print on this, so you guys can see what this seam actually looks like on a model. So now we have this thing printed out, and if we look right here, you can see that there's this line. So that is actually that seam. So if you can see this seam right here, that is where it kept lifting up and printing the layer, lifting up, printing the layer, lifting up, and guess what? It printed the layer. So this is something that we can do. One thing to help it, if we wanted to, we could sand this down and it would look beautiful if we're going to paint this. Like maybe we want to hit it with some spray paint and you'll never be able to tell where it is. But you might be using some type of filament that you want it to be able to be the color of the filament. For example, I printed this green silk and I've got this little vase and I really like it, but if you look at that silk, that seam line, I mean, it stands out like a sore thumb. It's terrible, honestly. As long as I always hold it like this to show people, it looks beautiful. And maybe this is up on a shelf and it's always going to be like that, and that's perfectly fine. But for this vase, the seam just isn't working for me. Now, if you're printing something like this will actually hide those seams for you because there's all of these edges. So if you actually look here on this, you can see these are where the edge seams are. So these are the start and stop points, and it keeps changing in different positions because it's using the smart seam method. So it's just trying to find where's the best place to start and stop, and it is figuring that out, and it's right on the corners. The corners are the best places to really hide this. So if you're really just looking at this, you're never really going to see it, versus me just doing this. You're like, there it is. Nope, 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 nope. Yep, there it is. So depending on the type of vase you're printing, this first method could work out really great for you. And this is the other thing about printing in this method. So the other thing about this method is if you're really wanting to have a thick wall, so this line count on this wall I think is 5 or 6. This is fantastic because, I mean, this thing is strong. And the other part is, on some of this, it was using the seams and hiding the edges, and the other part was right here. I don't know if you can see it, but right here along this whole line is where the seam is. There we go, now you can see it. It's not super noticeable, but it is a little noticeable if you really start to study it, because then it jumped over here and you can see right there. But for the most part, this thing turned out really nice. And I want to leave it at this because this is actually what I put my paintbrushes in. So you really have to think about, does this line matter to you? Because if the line doesn't matter to you, if you want a thicker vase, this is the way to go, this first method. Because it can be the strongest method, but there is drawbacks. These seams, the seams are kind of nasty. So now that we've seen the first method, let's jump back to the computer. So now that you've seen the first method, let's go into the second one. This one is using vase mode, or spiralize. Now, this one will actually print it without having any seams whatsoever. And all we got to do is come down to special modes, and in special modes, you're going to see this right here, spiralize outer contour. And all we got to do is check that, and then we're going to slice it. And I will show you what it does. So if we look here, we're spinning all the way around this. There is no start and stop point on this, except for down here. And if you see down here, there is a start and stop point, and that is because it is printing the layers of the base. Now, if we come down here, I've got a few layers for it, and it's printing the entire base, moving up, and then printing that. So once it gets past that, it will continuously print the walls in one line. There's no moving up a layer because it essentially is printing it like a slinky. It's going around and around, and as it's going around it, it's moving up so slightly. So it keeps going up and up and up and up. So you can think of it, this printing it just like a spring or a slinky, to where it keeps moving up while it's printing. And that causes it not to have any type of start points here because it never stops until it gets to the very top. Now, the preview mode is very deceptive because you see here, it just shows the first layer. Because how Cura works, it cannot show the spiralize because it's layer by layer. it still breaks it up in the preview mode for what the layers will look like. But if you notice here, there is no white dot here, and the white dot is the indicator of a start point on a layer. So it's not actually starting here, it's starting way down here, and it keeps going. The great thing about Spiralize, it automatically gets rid of your infill and takes off your top layer. So if you see here, there is no top layer, there is no infill. In the last method, we had to get rid of our infill, and we also had to get rid of our top layers. So this is a fantastic setting to be able to make a vase, and it's going to look beautiful. But the other thing here is, when you go and check this, it will automatically bring all of the wall thicknesses to 1. It only prints a single wall thickness. So you've only got 1. And the issue with this, once again, you are not going to have a strong vase. It will be very flexible depending on what you're using. But I'm going to go ahead and print this for you just so you can kind of see what it does and how it gets rid of that edge seam. So let's go jump over to the table and see what this print looks like. All right, so this was our first method where we had this seam on the edge right here. This is the second method, and this is using Spiralize. Now, I will get close here, and I'll spin this so you can see that there are no edge seams whatsoever. So you cannot see where this started or stopped because it stopped up here, and it started down here. So this is a beautiful way to get rid of any of your edge seams, Spiralize Contour. Now, the one thing about this, and it's the same thing with this, if you see here, it is very flexible. I'm putting about the same amount of force on each one of them, and you can see, since it's just a single wall thickness, it is not very strong at all. Depending on the vase you're doing, it might strengthen it. So like if I would have printed this in this format, it would have been a little stronger because of all of the in and outs, and it's actually providing its structure. So some of the prints you might be printing, this would work out fine, and it's going to make it strong enough for you. But for the most part, if you're wanting just to have a beautiful seam, and if you don't care about how thick it is because it's not going to be messed with, maybe it's just setting up on a shelf and you're putting, your paintbrush in it or something, this would be perfect because it is beautiful from any angle. So this is the Spiralize Contour mode. It also is known as Vase mode. So now that we've seen this, let's jump back over to the computer and see the third method. So now that we see that this gets rid of your edge seams, I haven't changed any settings so far, just essentially checked this button right here, the Spiralize Outer Contour. Now I'm going to show you a way that you can strengthen these a little bit, make your wall thickness just a little bit better. So for our third method, we are still in Spiralize Outer Contour, so no different than what we've already done in the method 2. But here is the difference. We are going to make this a lot stronger, and what we're going to be able to do here is make this wall a lot thicker. So we still see it's a single line width for the wall thickness. So wall line count you see right here in walls, and it says 1. Now, what I'm going to do is a couple things here. First, we're going to go into our quality. And when we come down here to line width, we're going to actually change the line width. And that is the width of the filament being put down by the nozzle. All right, so I am going to go ahead and change this to, say, 0.65. So I really want a thicker line width. And the thing about it is you can keep going up until it tells you it won't allow it. But I'm going to try to stay on the safe side here and just go to 0.65. Now, if you want a bigger line width, the other thing you could do is switch the nozzles on your printer and start printing with a larger nozzle. But for the nozzle that I have on my 3D printer, which is the stock on my Ender 3, I'm just going to go with a 0.65 millimeter line width. So the next thing is I want to slow this way down. So this is at 50. I'm actually going to slow it down to 15 millimeters a second. And this is really going to allow it to get that thick wall thickness. The slower you go with vase mode, the better it's going to be. Because if you have a very intricate model, There are times where it will give a hiccup, and even in spiralize, it will stop and think about it and then move on, and then you'll get all of these little zits on it. So if you're using this same method and you're still getting like, little pop marks and things like that, it's probably because you're going too fast. So you need to slow down for this method. We're going to print this at 15 millimeters a second. Now, what I want to do is really start to push out that filament. So it's going to push it out even more than normal. So I'm going to go into material right here, and I'm going to be doing two things under the material tab. First, I am going to increase the flow of my filament. I'm going to bring this up to 150%. I want this thing to push out this filament as fast as it will go. Now, this is the other thing. Since I'm pushing more filament through that hot end, that's going to have less time to heat up that plastic to be able to get it in a molten state to be able to squeeze through the nozzle. So what I have to do is I have to accommodate for that. So I'm actually going to print this at a temperature of 250 degrees. Because this is going through so much faster, I really need it to heat up that plastic a lot faster. So by doing this, the three big things in tandem I have going on here is the walls are printing thicker line widths, and also my temperature is a lot hotter, but my flow is a lot faster too. So I'm trying to find that happy medium to where it's going through the nozzle fast enough and heating it up quick enough, but I'm also going very slow. So with all of those things in tandem, this should produce a lot thicker of a line width for our vase mode. Now, this is something you definitely need to experiment with, because depending on your filament, 250 might be too high, or it might not be hot enough. You might have to go all the way to 260, or the flow rate is too much. So it's something that you're going to have to just look at and kind of play around with. These are just numbers that I use. So I've got this all sliced up, and I am going to hit print on this, and then we will jump to the table and see what it looks like. Okay, so now we have the third method here, where we're increasing our temperature and our flow to make our wall thickness a lot thicker. So let's just see here. If you see that once again, there are no edge seams on this at all. So it went in a spiralized mode and essentially printed a slinky that's fused together. So here's the difference. I don't know if you can even see that difference, but this one is thicker. So let's take some calipers and show you how much thicker this one actually is. So I have my digital calipers, and we're going to measure the wall thickness. And this is at a 0.4 wall thickness. 0.42, I'll just kind of get some different locations. 0.41. So now we have this one that we were pushing filament through a lot faster. And this is at a 0.65, 0.64, 0.66. So you can see that this is honestly just a little bit thicker. So this automatically printed it thicker. So now if we do the squeeze test, we can see that this is thicker. It's a lot more sturdy because we have more filament, and it gave a lot more filament on the walls and changed our wall thickness. So if you're looking for a vase mode, but you want it a little bit stronger, this is a good method to try. Now, doing this method with the thicker walls, when you're increasing your temperature, it does affect certain filaments. So this one was just fine at that temperature and that flow. But I was actually trying to print a vase with my silk filament, and it was scorching the actual filament. So you can see that these burn marks, because I was printing way hotter than the filament was supposed to be, and I wasn't pushing it through fast enough. So I would actually have to do this again and bring this down, the temperature, and keep the flow up, and try to figure out where that happy medium is. And it's different for all filaments, so I can't just tell you, well, you want to bump it down to, 230 degrees. I can't tell you that. It's something you're going to just have to experiment with. And finding something simple like this that prints in like an hour or so is really worth trying before you tried something really big. Because once this was printing, I stopped it because I saw all these scorch marks, and I knew that it was going to happen all the way around it too, so I would have seen burn marks on it. That's the thing when you're dealing with some rainbow filaments or some silk filaments. Some of those specialty filaments, they are very sensitive to temperature, and you can overheat them and start to burn this. But for the most part, as long as you can find that happy medium of how hot you can get your filament and how fast you can push the flow through, this will strengthen them for sure versus this. So if I press real hard, you can really see a big difference between these. So if you've been trying to print in vase mode and been having issues with these seams or spiral mode, it's just not enough for you, this is a good option for you. But here are the 3 options and the 3 different ways that you could print a vase. So before I get into the last part, I just want to say thank you to my newest patron on Patreon. And if you want to get exclusive access to the behind the scenes of what I'm working on, the opportunity to vote, and you can chat with me on my private Patreon. If you're interested, the link will be below for you. So the last thing, if you're still having issues with Cura, I made a full tutorial series on everything you need to know to get started in Cura. And I'll go ahead and put that playlist right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in that next video.